Here we go. Today is Sunday, January 17th, 2015. No, it's 2016. And this is episode 145 of the Defensive Security Podcast. My name is Jerry Bell, and joining me today is Mr. Andrew Callett.
You know, my only real 2016 resolution was to remember to say it was 2016 and write 2016 where I'm supposed to. But hey, and today's a little special because we're recording from an undisclosed location near ShmooCon in Washington, D.C.
That's right, in the bunker.
Well, if you could call it. It looks awfully like a hotel room, but we'll call it a bunker, sure.
Yeah. And apologies, I'm certainly losing my voice and feeling a little hungover, even though I didn't really drink that much.
So 2 drinks apparently, ruins Jerry the next day.
I'm a lightweight these days.
So this show might be a little, what's the word, bad.
Yeah. So just before we get in, the thoughts and opinions we express on the show are ours and do not represent those of our employer. So yes, as Andy said, we are here at ShmooCon. So I guess before we get started, what are you thinking about ShmooCon?
I think it's the best show ever, but that's mainly because they let me give a talk.
That's true.
No, it's a good show. It's a lot of people are frustrated with getting tickets to Shmoo, and that sort of sometimes can have a negative connotation around the show. But aside from that, it's a really good, solid show. It's handled well. Logistics are good. It's not too crowded. The content's really strong. I, as usual, didn't get to nearly as many talks as I wanted to. We ended up doing a lot more lobby conning and hallway conning, but it was good. I did give a talk, which hopefully some of you may have seen online. They stream it live. Eventually it will be, I'm sure, archived and displayed. It's a really happy talk about death. So just warning that it's not the happiest topic ever, but it's kind of an important topic, so I think. And it was received well. There was a bunch of other talks I wanted to go to. I didn't make it. Maybe we'll catch a few before we jet off to the airport. But it is a good show. Bruce and Heidi and those guys do a really good job putting it on. And if you can get to Shmoo, it's certainly worth coming to. And I do recommend it. But I know some people do get very frustrated with the ticket situation. But it's tough. I was talking to one of the organizers yesterday about this. They've only got a couple of options in terms of how to handle that, and there is a value in not letting your con get too big because, for instance, all the rooms here that the main talk lines are in are very big and have tons of seating, so there's not a lot of issue with having to turn over a room and kick people out and standing room only. You're able to move through the hallways, so it's a tough call. Anyway, but. Not to ramble too much about that, but it's if you can come, definitely recommend it. And I'll tell you, I've seen over and over again, usually in the last 2 weeks before ShmooCon, a lot of people sell tickets. Usually at face value too, where things come up, they got a ticket, they can't go. There are ways to find tickets.
Right.
What do you think?
It's a very different con than DerbyCon. I've not been to another larger con like this other than DerbyCon.
How do you compare and contrast?
It's certainly a lot more spread out. It's interesting that I see a lot of the same people, even with the ticket issue you just described. I see many of the same people. So it seems like if you are determined to get here, you can usually find a way. And I think there's also a lot of people that come here without tickets too, and just hang out in the bar area or in the common area. It's certainly more spread out.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot more at DerbyCon. People seem to congregate more at the conference, and I think people kind of here seem to go everywhere.
Yeah, I think that's true. Absolutely.
But it's good. I would say my favorite talk so far, by far, was the keynote given by a MIT professor.
The keynote was something. I really felt like I was completely out of my depth for the keynote. I missed the prerequisite class to follow that one.
And I think he was a professor of physics at MIT, and it really was a InfoSec talk. And if it gets posted, I will include a link. Otherwise, I'll tweet it out later. But basically, it was more about the fundamental evolution of technology intersected with human civilization, and basically the coming next generation of technology, which is really going to be about, I think, at least in his view, about assembling systems at a much more fundamental, I would say, molecular or atomic layer, using smart machines and things like that. And he talked about the inefficiency of our computers. How we ended up with von Neumann, and he had a lot of unkind things to say about Turing and von Neumann, which basically led us to the computing platform that we have today, which, as he describes, is like, I don't remember exactly the number he used, but magnitudes of order inefficient relative to what it could and should be. And that a lot of that stuff resonated with me, and it's had me thinking. So again, not InfoSec related, but I know a lot of people in this business are just kind of tech people. So interesting stuff. So having said that, the other thing I really liked here is obviously meeting people. I got to meet in person a bunch of people that I would never have been able to meet otherwise, and so that's been absolutely amazing. I do wish that I could turn off my introversion bit, but whatever. So,
I think most of us who are somewhat introverted can do it for periods of time, but it's it takes effort.
Yes,
it's we've met a lot of fans of the show or friends of the show, which was great, and it's still a little weird to me to have folks treat me as anything other than just a guy. A couple of fans who are shy about coming up to say hello and tell me how much they like the show, and it's still a very weird experience. I'm very thankful for it. Don't get me wrong, but it's it's sort of like we're just a couple of guys talking on a couple of microphones, and But I'm glad that we're helping people. I mean, one thing we've heard a lot lately is people mentioning that we've given them some useful tips that's helped them in their career, or that has helped guide them towards what they're looking for, which is great. I never anticipated we would be that useful to people, but that's excellent.
Yeah, and honestly, that's why we do it, right? I mean,
it is why. I just figured we would fail at it, but yes, yes, it is why.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so we do have a couple of stories.
Really quick, just want to mention one other con coming up that Hack in the Box in Amsterdam is a con that's coming up, and they're currently doing call for papers. So the organizer is a big fan of the show and asked us to kind of mention that out, and it's obviously in Amsterdam, which is if you're in the U.S. is a bit of a hike, but apparently it's an awesome show, and one of these days we're going to have to get over there.
Absolutely, so, does look good. I every time I read the press about it, I wish I were over there. And by the way, Amsterdam is absolutely a beautiful place, really remarkable. So if you can get there, go there.
Today's show brought to you by the Tourism Ministry of Amsterdam.
Yes, not that other places aren't particularly wonderful too. DC might not be among them, but.
DC has this kind of, every time I'm here, I think of, lately, like The Americans. I don't know if you watch that TV show, but it's about Russian spies in the 80s living in the DC area. But it evokes so much sort of nostalgia for TV shows or movies or political thrillers. It's sort of, it's almost a little surreal sometimes. And I've been to DC a ton, but it's like, that's actually, the Pentagon. That's actually, Arlington National Cemetery. That's actually the White House. It's sort of, it's an interesting place because it has so much history and reverence for the place. But, it's, I mean, it's January. It's a little cold. It's a little gray. It's a little dreary.
Yeah.
It's not. I mean, it's not the best time to be in DC.
No, I did. We vacationed here over the past spring, and it is a nice place. There's a lot of history here, a lot of cool stuff. So, also a nice place to visit. Mm-hmm. It's been interesting that ShmooCon has left zero time for anything other than transiting between the conference and the hotel. So,
well, I didn't realize this, but I've actually got today's Sunday, the 17th. My employer has tomorrow off. So had I known, I might have stuck around longer and done some touristy activities. It's really painful for me to not go to Smithsonian Air and Space when I'm in DC. It hurts a lot. It's
I understand.
My soul cries. That's not what we're here to talk about, though.
That's right. So we have, like I said, we have some stories, and the first of which comes from Ars Technica, and the title is "Security Firms Sued for Filing Woefully Inadequate Forensics Report."
This is an ugly, ugly situation.
And it's interesting. So the forensics company in question is Trustwave, and Trustwave has been, I would say, something of a lightning rod for this sort of, maybe not this exact thing, but this sort of thing in the past. And the story here is that back in 2013, they were investigating a breach at Affinity Gaming in Las Vegas. And I guess Affinity Gaming is a casino operator. And the long story short, they were investigating a breach. The allegation is, right, I don't know, the facts are to be determined in court, I suppose. The allegation is that Trustwave investigated the breach, claimed they had cleaned up the mess and contained the breach. There were high fives. Everybody went home, and apparently, unbeknownst to Affinity Games, there were still some malware present in their environment, and the intruders kept going. And there was basically a second round of second wave to the attack, which was later discovered by Mandiant. And so now Affinity is suing Trustwave, basically saying, we hired you, paid you a bunch of money, you said you had cleaned it all up, but they continued to be active while you were here and after you left, even though you said they were clean. You are a bad company, and so we'll see you in court. And that's apparently the nut of it. But this is really interesting to see what happens, right? If it goes anywhere, it could really kind of turn the whole incident response business on its head a little bit. Yeah,
this is definitely a big, in my opinion, as far as I know, a big shift in potential liability. I certainly don't know Trustwave's contractual disclaimers, but most of the time, I think these sorts of contracts, when you sign on, is basically, hey, we're going to give you best effort, and we assume no liability. But I guess that's going to be tested in court. It's also interesting that, keep in mind that Mandiant is, of course, a competitor of Trustwave, and there's a lot of swipes from Mandiant at Trustwave. Things like saying that Mandiant's report also concluded the various recommendations of Trustwave basically were pointless and would have had no real value in preventing the attacker from again accessing the systems, which is interesting. But it's a really I'm not apologizing for Trustwave, though. Interestingly, Jerry and I used to work with the people who started it, but that's just mere coincidence. It's a tough problem. How do you really, really, really know that you've kicked an attacker fully out of your environment?
Yes.
And do we really want to open this box of making a post-breach incident response firm liable for not fully eradicating a malware infestation, if you will, or fully addressing business practices and vulnerabilities and everything else to prevent it going further? I mean, you're almost forcing Trustwave into or someone in their situation, a permanent liability for future breach activity when really the organization, in this case Affinity Games Gaming, has a whole bunch of choices in what they choose to do or not do. And how much can a company like Trustwave really know about that organization, everything about it, in a certain period of time? We don't know how much they charged. We don't know if they were given certain limitations in time. But, at the end of the day, is it possible Trustwave was basically really incompetent? Absolutely. Does suing them in court over it, is that a good thing for industry? I don't know that it is.
Yeah, it'll be very interesting to see where it goes. I will tell you, the whisper here at the conference that I've overheard some conversations is that kind of the other way, basically saying, this is not a surprising thing given that it was Mandiant, and so there's some finger pointing.
What do you mean, given that it was Mandiant?
It's not surprising that we're here because Mandiant has this propensity, and I'm just repeating what I heard, right? Mm-hmm. Mandiant apparently has this propensity for throwing rocks at some of their competitors. And that was, I've never worked with Mandiant, so I don't have any firsthand experience. Well, but that's the...
Yeah, I think that... Well, first of all, we've got lawyers involved, so lawyers are always going to make the situation as stark as they possibly can. But one of the quotes from the complaint, which kind of spun up the lawsuit, was, quote, Mandiant's forthright and thorough investigation concluded that Trustwave's representations were untrue, and Trustwave's prior work was woefully inadequate.
Yeah. Now I do want to say that, again, I've not had the luxury of reading the report that Trustwave issued, but it does seem, if Trustwave did say, hey, we got it all clean and you're good to go, that is concerning to me because I don't know how you can actually make that statement. And from as someone who has had to handle some very large and ugly and complex breaches, there's really not a deterministic way to tell if you've completely eradicated the actor other than burning it all down and starting over, which very few companies are really willing to do. It's expensive, it's disruptive, especially if you're a large company. I think somebody like Sony, they had a gun to their head. They basically had no other choice,
right?
But that's what they did. And it always concerns me when in the aftermath of a breach people don't take that step, because I've always been left wondering, well, we really have no assurance that that they're not still here somewhere and we just don't know it. So,
well, Malwarebytes ran clean.
That's true. What more can you want, right?
It's a tough situation, and I worry about a chilling effect. If this stands and there isn't some sort of gross negligence that's non-industry standard, if, for instance, Trustwave is found liable and they have to pay a bunch of money, does that mean that other organizations are going to stop doing this sort of service for fear of missing something really sophisticated, or just not having the time, scope, money, whatever from the client to go find it all? And we're left with less and less folks doing these services. I think we've got the opposite problem. We don't have enough folks, and certainly in any industry, you're always going to have a bell curve of talent and capability, and typically price can reflect that. I'd be very curious to know, for instance, what the price difference is between Trustwave, PCI, Forensics Investigation, and a Mandiant one, right? And also how you subjectively rate the different capabilities of those organizations. But ultimately, it's a tough call in this situation, because if I were running one of these organizations and suddenly had to guarantee that organization was clean, I would not.
Well, it begs an interesting game theory perspective, right? So I'm not sure that forensics companies are going to get out of the business, but I would bet you that forensics companies are going to be hesitant to walk out of an engagement like this, assuming that this suit is successful, just for a second, I would imagine that these forensics companies are not going to leave the business or their customer without a recommendation that says replace it all.
Right.
And maybe some methodology on how to contain and make sure there's no cross contamination and whatnot. But then you get to the point of, well, if that's the recommendation,
right?
Why am I paying you $250,000
at least
to tell me that I need to replace my entire IT infrastructure?
But that's what we're going to force people into saying, right? They're going to come in. They're going to come with a whole bunch of recommendations they know the customer will never really do to protect themselves, them being the consulting organization, from whatever liability that may come up afterwards. I'm not saying we shouldn't hold vendors accountable, and I don't know all the details, but this is a weird one that I think could have some pretty chilling consequences on the industry if we're not careful.
Yeah. But I do think from a pragmatic perspective, it does highlight the point that here you have I think the facts of the case are, at least we know some facts of the case which seem to be not in dispute, which is they were compromised. TrustWave came in, and they were still compromised when TrustWave left. Now, whatever else you want to say, that's up for debate. But I think it points to the challenge we have, that here you have a somewhat sophisticated incident response company who didn't catch some stuff. And so what does that say about the rest of us who are doing this on our own?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not easy.
Right.
This isn't ever a guarantee. I mean, especially when we have attackers who are looking at being as persistent and as quiet as they can be in certain circumstances.
Right.
I don't, like I said earlier, how can you ever be 100% assured that you've kicked them out?
Yeah.
Even if you found their initial exploit point and infiltration point and shut that down, it doesn't mean that they haven't established persistence in some other methodology.
And they often do.
Yeah.
That's the problem. All right, so moving on to our next story. This one comes from CSO Online, and the title is Trend Micro Flaw Could Have Allowed Attacker to Steal All Passwords. So Trend Micro has, as I'm sure everybody's aware, an antivirus package. But what you may not be aware of is that antivirus package also contains a password manager, which I guess is just a free add-on. But apparently the antivirus suite has a number of APIs that are callable via web pages. And so basically, if you visit a web page, the web server can make API calls to the local Trend Micro agent. And apparently there's like 70 different APIs.
So this agent is interpreting every single HTTP and HTTPS.
Well, yeah, it's looking for certain it's looking for certain API calls, and apparently these API calls, if properly abused, will allow arbitrary remote code execution. So basically, a web server that you visit can execute code using the Trend Micro agent.
That's excellent.
Absolutely, and it will allow your the website you're visiting to steal all of your passwords. What is not to love about that?
I don't see the problem here.
Yeah, and so two things. One is, it's the law of unintended consequences. It's you're adding some interesting features and functionality, and I'm sure from the perspective of Trend Micro's product management, they had a really good thing in mind when they conceived of this, this thing, but they obviously didn't think through.
The product management slide deck was excellent on this.
Well, I'm sure it was.
This brings up an interesting sort of challenge, is when our security technology starts introducing more risk into our environment.
Which has become a theme lately.
Yeah, and it seems like we're seeing more. I mean, certainly these tools are getting more sophisticated and whatnot, but that is an interesting problem. So we've seen some other stuff like this too. There was a lot of speculation at the Target that the software distribution tools from Microsoft were used to push the malware out.
Right.
I don't know if we've ever gotten full confirmation of that, but there's a lot of speculation. And but at some point you've got to trust something. This is the problem, is that these things do happen, but you can't necessarily throw the baby out with the bathwater. And we're seeing the same thing like with Juniper and Fortinet and some other security technologies right now that our confidence in them is certainly waning, but you still have to use them.
Well, you do have to use them, but I think you also have to have some healthy amount of skepticism about what they do for you, and that they are not omniscient and they can't do everything, and
they make mistakes too.
Right, they make mistakes, and not only do they make mistakes, but that people. I think from what I've seen, a lot of people, for whatever reason, right, implement them badly, right, and so when you talk about like the Juniper deal with SSH. Well, if you don't have your Juniper device accessible with SSH on the internet, it's a far smaller problem. But we know that happened en masse because after it was announced, people were trawling Shodan looking for Juniper devices hanging out on the internet, and they were finding them.
It's a far smaller problem if it's not exposed on the internet, as long as nobody knows about it.
Yes.
As soon as it's known, it's a huge insider problem.
Right.
Or, a pivot point once somebody's got inside. But yes, I agree. And again, that goes to the assumption of, well, nobody would expose this on the internet. Guess what? They do. Intentionally or otherwise.
Right. So yeah, that's it's not a good look.
Oh, hey.
So our last story is actually about Fortinet, which we just mentioned. So this comes from Ars Technica as well, and the title is "Et2 Fortinet: Hard-coded password raises new backdoor eavesdropping fears." So this is a little different, I guess, than the Juniper deal, where Juniper had a hard-coded password, and we actually got to see some of the code that contained that backdoor password, and it was clearly in the Juniper case. I would say, just having been an old time C++ guy,
and we mean old,
and I do mean old.
I mean,
it was
he chiseled his C++ on stone tablets. Old.
It was pretty clear to me that someone was playing a game trying to hide code in plain sight, right? So we don't know that that's going on with Fortinet. So on the Juniper side, Juniper's like, holy crap, this is bad. We're going to, here's some patches, beware. Contrast.
Please don't sue us.
Contrast that with Fortinet basically saying, apparently releasing a patch that fixed the problem a year ago or so, not really saying anything about it. And when someone realized that there was a hard-coded password, Fortinet's response was, well, it was actually implemented as a management function that would allow our central management systems to communicate and manage
certainly
our devices.
Yeah, because that by far is the best way to do that.
Right, and we've since realized how silly that was, and we fixed it.
It was a feature. We fixed it.
It was a feature. Yeah, I mean, it was an ill-conceived feature. Right. We realized our mistake. We patched it. Why are we even talking about it?
Thanks for your concern. Although, I gotta say, I don't know if that's legitimate, because the hard-coded password is, and I apologize for this but it is, just to give you a flavor for this, FGTABC11 *XY plus QQZ27.
Yeah.
That doesn't sound like a, one-time, not even one-time, but a static shared administrative password to me. But I guess it's possible. I guess somebody thought they were being clever. I don't know. I mean, do you think that's legitimate? Do you think that this was indeed an ill-conceived management technique?
It's really hard to say. I mean, it could have been a debug thing. One of the issues is you never really get the full story because there's marketing spin, right? But I think that the interesting contrast is in how Juniper handled it versus how these guys, Fortinet handled it. In Juniper's, I think Juniper fell on their sword and said, this is a bad thing. You really need to take it very seriously. And WatchGuard seems to be, I'm sorry, not WatchGuard, Fortinet seems to be just taking a very different, nonchalant approach to it. So,
well, it makes me wonder too. I don't see it anywhere in this article, but I'd be very curious what the release notes said for the patch that came out.
Yes,
and how urgent they communicated that patch to be installed. Not a lot of people aggressively patched their network gear.
Yeah, so just I did find the statement that they released. Here's the statement released by Fortinet on this issue. The issue was resolved, and a patch was made available in July 2014 as part of Fortinet's commitment to ensuring the quality and integrity of our code base. This was not a backdoor vulnerability issue, but rather a management authentication issue. The issue was identified by our product security team as part of their regular review and testing efforts. After careful analysis and investigation, we were able to verify this issue was not due to any malicious activity by any party, internal or external. All versions of FortiOS from 5.08 and later, as well as FortiOS 4.3.17 and later, are not impacted by this issue. End quote. So yeah, that's. I think that again, it goes back to what we were talking about a couple minutes ago. The security technology that we're deploying itself has its own raft of issues, which I think really are only now coming into focus, and so it's not. In my view is that technology, the focus of technology from a vulnerability perspective kind of comes in waves. And so for a long time, people were focusing very heavily and intently on Microsoft. And there's lots of research on that because it was, let's be fair, right? It was a very target-rich environment. It was easy to find stuff.
And it also has a great deal to do with market share.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And now, probably because of that market share perspective too, people are... and I think it's also a self-feeding thing, right? So now, we saw there was default passwords in Juniper. Well, now you can imagine that there's a whole host of security researchers picking through every damn firewall out there looking for default passwords, and we're probably going to find some.
Right.
This is probably not the last. And antivirus engines. We've seen in the past couple of years a number of significant issues, and I think that trend's going to continue. Those are really complicated pieces of code. As much as we hate them, and we laugh at their effectiveness, they're ungodly complicated.
Yep.
And we're going to find problems. And I think as security people or as IT people, we have to be aware that things we're slapping into our environment to help solve other issues are creating new issues that we are not even yet aware of.
I guess the one thing I would say is that sometimes we still have to just deal with those issues. We can't just say, well, we're going to not use anything because right. Everything's vulnerable.
Oh, great.
But some people think that way, right? They say, well, the NSA could use this against people. We still have to do our jobs. We still have to minimize risk to an acceptable level. We can never get to zero.
Yes.
So no matter what, we still have to figure out a way to cope with these situations and move forward and just be cognizant of it. And certainly, I'm not making any excuses for Trend or Fortinet or anybody else that they shouldn't be doing this, but we can't knee-jerk into saying, well, then all the security technology sucks and it's not worth employing, because that's not going to help us either.
Mm-hmm. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just on the point that we have to be aware that this is not infallible technology. It's not just that it isn't always effective. It's that it has its own bugs, and we need to be aware of it.
Yep.
So. Anyway, any closing thoughts?
No, I'm probably going to head back over to ShmooCon for the last couple hours before we head to the airport. So we can wrap it here and get back to our regular recording schedule next week. And
good deal.
Hopefully be a little more timely. Sorry, the last couple of weeks have been kind of bumpy. We've all been very busy and some stuff going on in our personal lives. That's calmed down now, but the holidays and everything else makes life a little more challenging.
That's right. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for listening. And just a reminder, if you want to find links to the stories we talk about today or on any of the other episodes, you can go to our website, www.defensivesecurity.org, and you can find links to all these stories, as well as our back episodes. So we also like to say thank you to those Patreon donors who have donated money. Thank you very much.
Absolutely, thank you.
And thank you, a special thank you to those people that we've had the pleasure of meeting in person here at DerbyCon and other places. Thank you very much for coming up and saying hi. You should not feel shy. We actually love meeting people,
even if we're awkward about it.
Yeah, it's awkward because we're awkward, not because, well, you get it.
Yes.
Anyway. All right.
But it does honestly make it worth it.
That's right.
I mean, because this is mostly a labor of love, and it does take a decent amount of effort. So knowing that it makes a difference for folks definitely is very, very encouraging and fulfilling.
That's right. Thank you very much. Talk again next week.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.
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 Bye-bye.